Last week, I saw a video review of this miter gauge. It's the Harvey Compass MG-36. This is a high-end tool that comes at a premium price. So anyone that buys one of these has every right to expect excellent performance. And I've gotten excellent performance from both of mine over a long period of time. But that particular review was decidedly negative. It was a brand new tool that he had. It came fresh out of the box at the beginning of the review. I didn't see any cuts made that I could use to judge the results that he got, but it was clear from what he was pointing to in the video that something was off about the particular sample he had. So as I watched, I went from dumbfounded because his experience was so different from mine to genuine surprise when I noticed something odd about his miter gauge. So I skimmed through the comments and I found that there were a couple other people who are experienced with this tool who noticed the same thing as well. I'll tell you what that is in a second, but first, some of you must be wondering why I care what he thinks of this tool at all. I mean, you can find bad reviews of pretty much any of your favorite things. Sometimes I see reviews that just leave my head shaking, wondering if I'm looking at a different product altogether. Personal opinion is usually a big part of that, and sometimes people just get a bad sample. That happens even with premium brands. I've been trying to buy a new high-end sound bar for a TV in my house, and I'm about to rebox my third one, all from well-known and trusted brands. It happens. So why does it concern me? Because Harvey is one of our family of brands that I hand-picked and have personally used in my shop before recommending their products to you. I take that responsibility very seriously. And while I haven't done a full review on this yet, I have recommended it to viewers who are in the market and have the budget for a premium miter gauge. And I simply wouldn't do that if my experience was anything like what I saw in that review. I honestly have zero problem telling a sponsor I can't recommend one of their products. I've done it several times. I've walked away for some big contracts because I didn't believe that the product or the brand was a good fit for my audience. But what I saw in that video was not the miter gauge that I know. I didn't just pull these out of the boxes. I got this one in mid-2020 when it was just out. I got a second one when I added a second saw to my shop in early 2021. My guys have used these extensively. I have personally used and maybe even slightly abused them for a year and a half. And it's because of that experience that I was able to identify something in that video that made me wonder if I was indeed looking at the same product. It was the miter bar. The one in the video looks completely different from the miter bars on the two Harvey gauges that I own. Did they change the product? If they did, I have a responsibility to my audience to test the latest version if I plan to recommend it in the future. So I got a third one. It just arrived, and you're going to see me make my first cuts right out of the box with no adjustments or modifications. So we'll find out together if this miter gauge still performs as a premium gauge should. If I find that the gauge I saw in that video wasn't just a bad sample, but this one here also has the same flaws, I have no problem telling Harvey I can't recommend it. They have plenty of other great tools that I can recommend, so it's not even a matter of losing a sponsor. It's about this particular tool and whether it's right for my audience. If you don't believe me and you still think my opinion can be swayed by a sponsor relationship, I get that, so I'm going to make it really easy for you. I'm going to leave out all the discussion of the fancy doodads and all the things that I have liked about my gauges as a matter of personal opinion. We'll save all that stuff for another video. This time, I'm just going to make some cuts, show you what's working on the gauge, what's happening, test the results, and let the tool speak for itself in ways that you can see with your own eyes. If you don't trust me, you don't have to listen to what I say. Just look at what you see. This is my first cut right out of the box, and according to my compass, it's dead on at 90 degrees, so the tool came pre-adjusted as you would expect at this price point. Now let's cut some angles. It's important to know how this miter gauge is designed differently from others as respects the angles. On the underside, you can see a stainless steel ring with machined indents at the most common angle settings. A spring-loaded spherical pin fits into those indents. The idea is to make adjustments quick and smooth while reducing wear that may lead to inaccuracy down the road. It's not my opinion, that's simply the concept behind the design. You rotate the head to the position you want and release the tab so the pin snaps into the indent. Notice how the indents are wedge-shaped. They get narrower as they go deeper into the steel ring. As you tighten the handle on top, the rounded end of that pin is wedged into the indent and auto-centers. It's difficult to see here, but I've intentionally set the cursor a tiny bit off the 0-degree mark. As I tighten the handle, note how it draws the cursor into alignment as that pin seats deeply in the indent beneath. If I leave the knob loose, of course I'm going to get some slop because the pin can move in the wider portion of that wedge-shaped indent, but nobody makes cuts with a loose miter gauge. When I fully tighten it, it locks in my angle. As I said, I want the tool to speak for itself. So let's make some cuts to test not only the accuracy of the mechanism, but also its repeatability. Because if there's uncorrected slop in the mechanism, you could not possibly repeat the same results over and over as you move in and out of those detents. So we'll start with another 90-degree cut and check it for accuracy. This is a high-quality aluminum-bodied Starrett protractor. It's the same one that I saw in that video in an earlier segment when he was testing a different gauge. Note that each line on this scale represents 2 degrees. Some cuts will fall between the lines. However, there is a line for 90, and for a second time, you can see that my gauge has cut dead on. Now I'll move the gauge away from that indent and over to 22.5 degrees. Keep in mind again, the mark after the 20 on this scale is actually 22, so 22.5 is just to the side of that mark and right where this cut falls. Now let's go back to 90 and see if the gauge's positioning mechanism will accurately return us there for a third time. It looks like it did. But we have some more detents. 45 is next, and once again, I've hit the mark, which is indicated by that little circular degree symbol on the scale. Now, back to 90. I keep returning here to test whether tightening the handle and drawing that pin into the indent will consistently center the mechanism onto that precise angle no matter how many times you move it in and out of the detents. This is the 4th time it has accurately returned me to 90. 60 degrees is a tougher cut. I like to angle the fence downward so I don't wedge against the blade. But once again, right on the mark. One more time back to 90. But this time, I'm using the pin option on the flip stop to support the end that was previously mitered. If this pin doesn't work, if it slips, the workpiece may deflect during the cut and the angle would be off. But as you can see, worked just fine, and my 90 is again dead on for a 5th time. Remember, I didn't adjust it out of the box. You're witnessing my very first cuts with this new miter gauge, and it seems to perform exactly as the older ones did. But let's withdraw the pin completely and lock out those detents altogether so they have no effect. And now I'll see if I can accurately cut odd angles without those benefits. For this, I have to rely upon my ability to align this cursor with the marks on the scale. Zoomed way in like this, you may note that the cursor does not physically touch the scale. There is a tiny gap. How tiny? Where I measured mine to 12 thousandths of an inch. That's about 1/3 of a millimeter. The gauge in the review I saw had a gap of 1/16 or 64 thousandths of an inch. Now that may give us a big clue about what the problem may have been in that video, but I'll come back to that shortly. Right now, I want to continue letting the tool speak for itself. So let's do 3 random angles and see if we can align them by eye. 28 degrees, 38 degrees, and 48 degrees. Now I wear glasses. My eyes aren't perfect, but according to my compass, I was able to make those 3 cuts accurately by eye alone without the indents. So can I do it again? Because a premium miter gauge shouldn't just be accurate, it should be consistently so. 28 degrees, 38 degrees, 48 degrees, and now back to 90 for a 6th time. This gauge has still not missed a single cut, despite moving back and forth between indents and eliminating the indents altogether by locking the pin and using my eye and cursor alone. As I said, I can go on about all the special features of a premium miter gauge that I like, and I probably will in a future episode of Cool Tools. But when we talk about things like micro adjusters and flip stops and fence extenders, these are matters of personal opinion. In this video, I wanted to keep my opinion and any unintentional bias out of the equation as much as I could, because nobody can really argue with the results. So why are my results so accurate if the other review said the tool was bad? Well, evidently, it's not because they redesigned the miter bar itself. Mine adjusted easily. I didn't find it fiddly at all, and it fit well in the miter slot. I could grab the end of this fence, and if I try hard enough, I can get some movement somewhere. But as you saw over and over again, under actual cutting conditions, there was nothing in the mechanism or the bar or anything else that affected the precision of this tool. So the key to understanding that other video may be the gap he reported between the cursor and the compass head of his gauge. He said it was a full 1/16 of an inch. That's 5 times wider than mine. He complained that this made his scale difficult to align by eye, and that's understandable with such a wide gap. So I contacted Harvey, and they told me the gap should be no wider than 1 millimeter. Now, I don't know why his is wider, but since the locking pin is attached to that cursor block, any excess distance there would certainly prevent that pin from properly seating in those wedge-shaped indents. If it doesn't fully seat, it could move within the wider portion of the wedge, and that would cause slop in the mechanism and prevent it from repeatedly locking in the same position. That block mounts to the miter bar via some machine screws. I don't know if there is any room for adjustment at all. Mine are perfectly set, and they've remained so for all this time that I've been using them fairly heavily, so I'm not going to mess with them to find out. The compass head itself, like all miter gauges, pivots at a single point further up the bar. This is also secured with a machine screw. If it was off on his, perhaps there is some room for movement, and by moving the block and that compass head combined, you may get enough to close up that gap. It's possible that a few gauges were improperly milled or assembled during a production, and that somehow slipped past quality control. As I said, that happens even with high-end tools, and I think that's what happened here. He just happened to get a bad one. And looking at the comments on the video, it seems like a few other people might have gotten a bad one too. I asked the company about it, and they said they have sold tens of thousands of these miter gauges, and they very rarely get a return. And I tend to believe that because it seems like a cult following has sprung up around this miter gauge full of people that really like it. But they also said no tool is perfect, and they're always working on improvements. So you can take that as you will. All I know is I have now worked with 3 of them. These are all from different production runs, separated by 1.5 years. I have used it extensively for 1.5 years. I have now thoroughly tested its accuracy on camera for everybody to see. So if people ask me if I still recommend the Harvey MG-36 to anyone in the market for a premium miter gauge, I will say absolutely. See you next time.